I'm Des Dearlove. Welcome to the Thinkers50. My guest today is Professor David Grayson. David is Director of the Downty Centre for Corporate Responsibility at Cranfield's School of Management and one of Europe's leading experts on corporate responsibility. David, welcome. Corporate social responsibility, CSR, corporate sustainability, we've got all this language, all this jargon. Does it all mean the same stuff, David?
People get terribly confused about it. I show my MBA students 6 different reports, all from the same business sector, energy and extractives. All those different companies like Shell and Chevron and Mobil Exxon have got different titles for their corporate responsibility or corporate citizenship or corporate sustainability reports, and yet they're all, in fact, when you look at the content, covering the same kind of issues. I prefer to talk about responsible business. What responsibilities does a company choose to have for its social, environmental and economic impacts? And I don't think that's just about mitigating risks, although for a lot of companies that's where they are, but it's in the best companies, the leadership companies in this space, it's about how you find business opportunities and how you maximise opportunities from thinking about your social, environmental and economic impacts.
And I think, you've gone straight really to the heart of the matter, because for a lot of people still, even now, it feels like these companies are paying lip service to a notion. It's a way of covering their backs. There's a sense that we're, as you say, mitigating risk, but you really believe that we've gone beyond that point.
It's a spectrum. Companies are at different stages of maturity. There are still some companies around the world that are in denial that these issues have got anything to do with them. So they may be a fast food company which says childhood obesity, nothing to do with us, Gov. Some companies are simply at the complier stage, will do the minimum that a particular national market expects. And then there are more which are at risk mitigator stage. And I think the really interesting stuff where managers and business leaders start to apply all their strategic skills and entrepreneurial aptitude and drive is when you start looking for business opportunities from the better management of social, environmental and economic impacts, and by understanding these big picture changes, the mega trends which are out there, which are hugely challenging for businesses, but which also will create great business opportunities.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those mega trends. What are the big issues that are facing companies now?
I mean, the reality that by 2030, with an increasing population, we'll need 50% more energy, we'll need 50% more food, we'll need at least 30% more water. That's the outgoing UK government chief scientific advisor. That's his calculations, and that's before that little extra challenge called climate change. So I think that we're seeing businesses recognising, whether it's companies like Coca-Cola or SAB Miller, recognising that water is a fundamental strategic issue that their companies have to grapple with, or whether it's companies thinking about how do we minimise waste to landfill, or how do we reduce our carbon emissions, because those are going to be constraints on our businesses if we don't tackle them.
So that you're talking in terms of constraints. I understand the constraints. We've talked about the risk mitigation side of it. Where are the opportunities then? Are we talking about opportunities to create new, greener businesses? We're
talking about opportunities for businesses both to address environmental challenges, but also issues of social inclusion and sustainable development from the social and the economic side, as well as the environmental side. For example, M-Pesa, Vodafone in Kenya. So there you had what started as a community project in Kenya to help people who don't have access to a bank account to be able to have access to money. M-Pesa, it's M for mobile, Pesa is Swahili for money, mobile money. 36% of the Kenyan GDP now goes through the Vodafone subsidiary Safaricom in Kenya through their M-Pesa service. It's the most commercially attractive and successful product of that Vodafone subsidiary, and that's now being applied in other countries. That's a kind of opportunity from thinking about what are our social, in that case, social and environmental, social and economic impacts, recognising that you can use the power of mobile telephony to tackle big social issues, or China Mobile in the same sector, world's biggest mobile phone company, providing mobile health facilities through their mobile phone network.
And some of these are what C.K. Prahalad was talking about when he talked about the opportunities to commercialise at the bottom of the pyramid.
Indeed.
Okay, so we're beginning to see some of that stuff come through. So how do companies do this stuff? I mean, the ones that are good at it.
Yes, I mean, the first thing that the ones that are good at it are recognising is we just need to understand and get a grip on what are the most significant, the most material social and environmental and economic impacts that we have. That might involve you in looking at your competitors. Most big companies nowadays will produce sustainability or corporate responsibility or corporate citizenship reports, or an integrated report with their annual account and reports, where they will be analysing these pressures, these trends. A lot of trade associations now will have good practice guidance for their member companies about what are the big issues from a sustainability perspective in their sector. Or it may well be that you do some scenario planning with the board and senior management team to understand how will some of these big global trends and the way that they're developing affect this business and our ability to do business. So first off, just understanding where are our most material impacts.
And then what's the next step? I mean, so you've got an understanding, hopefully beginning to get some grasp of the context and how the context is changing and how that's likely to have impact on the business. What do these more enlightened companies do then?
I think it's important that they think about, so what is the business case for us? Is it going to be because actually by getting a better grip on these issues, it can be a source of new marketplace insight and leading to innovation like M-Pesa or other business opportunities that are arising out of the better management of sustainability? Is it about better ways of engaging our employees? Because particularly Generation Y expect to work for an organisation that not just pays well, offers good career development opportunities and interesting work and good people to work with, but they also want to feel that they're working for a company whose values they share. And we can see more evidence of companies which are committed genuinely to responsible business practices, having more engaged employees who are more likely to bring forward ideas. We're doing work around the concept of social entrepreneurism and how companies can stimulate that by being very clear and obviously genuine in their commitment to responsible business. Or it may be the business case is much more about reputation management and risk mitigation and about reducing costs. And in practice, it's probably a mix of those things. But using that business case to help to stimulate the new business opportunities.
And presumably it's at that point when we begin to see, because traditionally this stuff has tended to happen sort of separate from the main strategy. We sort of did it in a box over here. You even have this phrase, people talked about non-market strategy. It would be nice to think those two things might start coming together in a way so that it was core to the strategy of the company.
Absolutely. Quite a few years ago, I co-authored a book where we talked about moving from bolt-on to built-in. And I think what's really important is when companies recognise it's not about having a big macho commercial strategy here and then we have this sustainability strategy over there. It's how does sustainability change our entire business strategy? So when Unilever, for example, says we're going to double the size of the business and we're going to halve our environmental footprint, that's a big, hairy, audacious goal, a fundamental change of the overall business strategy. And in order to do that, they went through that exercise of looking for every single one of their brands. Where are our significant impacts and what's the business case for addressing our social, environmental and economic impacts, and how through that can we find the new business opportunities?
And presumably too, this also takes a different type of leadership, because you can't have a CEO who's out of step with what the views that he's espousing, one assumes.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the big issues that we can see is an interesting organisation that we work with called GlobeScan, which does a lot of polling around the world, both of experts but also of the general publics, about what do employees think about how their company communicates on corporate responsibility and sustainability. And one of the really sobering statistics is that more than half employees don't believe the communications that they see and receive about what their company is doing in terms of sustainability. So it has to be authentic. One of the reasons why we hear so many people talking about greenwashing and about companies just really doing this for the PR and not being genuine about it is because employees see a mismatch between what they're being told is corporate policy and corporate initiatives, but versus what they really experience. I mean, a classic example, Mark Moody-Stewart, ex-boss of Shell, talking about issuing a clear directive that health and safety had to be absolutely paramount, and that if necessary, people had to accept that they would need to invest more and might become more expensive, but that health and safety was a really important concern for the company. And he said, you know, for several years afterwards, as he went around the world doing town hall meetings with his employees, he would time after time get asked about this memo that he'd sent out. Now here was a leader, very committed leader incidentally, with a strong pedigree on these issues, but even he, you know, was finding that people were challenging and testing, did you really mean it? And he tells the story that years later he was delighted to see a chef on one of the oil rigs, I think it was, that stopped all operations because he had health and safety concerns, because the message had finally got through that anybody in the organisation could actually say, stop, there's a problem here potentially on health and safety, we need to check it out because this is so important. That's, I think, an act of authentic leadership for sustainability.
You mentioned coalitions. Your most recent book has looked at coalitions, because obviously a single company, even acting on opportunity, single companies on their own aren't going to change the world. They can't tackle every problem. What is the significance of coalitions, and are they beginning to have more impact?
One of the words that I hear now very frequently in meeting with CEOs and senior directors of big companies, and indeed with politicians and people from NGOs and so on, is this word collaboration. Because you're quite right, even a Unilever or a Walmart, etc., they can only move the needle terribly slightly on their own. And you need to get systematic action. And so what we're seeing is that you have most of the world's 100 largest economies now having some kind of business-led coalition promoting responsible business, developing the agenda, making the business case, providing a framework and some platforms for organising collective business action, sometimes lobbying with government and other players to change the rules of the game to make it easier to get more responsible business in practice. And we're also seeing a lot more specialist organisations. So in the chemical industry, for example, you've had for many years now the Responsible Care Initiative, or the International Toy Council has a Responsible Care Initiative. So we're also seeing more subject-specific coalitions emerging on a particular issue, like, say, water, as we were discussing earlier, and also many more multi-stakeholder initiatives. So things like the Global Reporting Initiative, which has been helping to develop a globally recognised standard that companies and indeed other organisations can use to report on their social, environmental and economic impacts.
You talked a lot there about coalitions, but I mean, what about bringing the stuff back into the company and how you tie it together within an organisation?
Absolutely. A critical part of all of this is how do you integrate it throughout the business. So what does it mean for the marketing function? Are we marketing responsibly? Are we advertising responsibly? Are the actual products and services that we are selling responsible, or is there some misuse of our products and services we need to be thinking about? How do we integrate this with our supply chain and logistics and with our human resource management? So getting each of the business functions and each of the strategic business units thinking very carefully about what does this overall company strategy for sustainability mean for our part of the business. And of course trying to engage internally employees, but also the value chain, so suppliers and business partners. But we're also seeing increasingly, just look at Marks and Spencer with shopping, or some of the companies that are now trying to engage their consumers in a dialogue around sustainable consumption. We're seeing consumers starting to be almost co-opted by companies to help them in the implementation of sustainability. And last of all, you need to measure and report what you're doing. The old classic, what gets measured gets managed. There are lots of different mechanisms, whether it's the Global Reporting Initiative or now the new drive around what's known as integrated reporting, integrating your sustainability reporting in your traditional accounts and annual report, and using that crucially for continuous improvement. I mean, the worst thing is companies just putting out these glossy sustainability reports and thinking, job done, when in fact the real use of such reports is to drive continuous improvement through the business.
I know you're passionate about this, but a lot of people out there are still very cynical. What is fundamentally at stake here with all this stuff?
I think it's very simple. The question is, how will 9 billion people live reasonably well not as well as you or I expect to live, or probably most of the people who are watching 50 Thinkers, but how will 9 billion people live reasonably well within the constraints of one planet by mid-century? That's the reality. And from a business perspective specifically, how do businesses, because they're not charities, they're not governments, they shouldn't try to be, how do businesses find profitable solutions to those challenges? World Business Council for Sustainable Development has done a great Vision 2050 where they look at 10 key pathways to a more sustainable world, each of which has got loads of business opportunities, whether it's smart cities and smart grids and things, or whether it's in terms of sustainable agriculture, or whether it's in terms of a whole series of new technologies around caring and aging and health. But how does businesses find profitable solutions that will also address this fundamental issue of 9 billion people surviving within the constraints of one planet living?
David Grayson, thank you very much.
Thank you.